In a major legal clash between a global gaming company and U.S. trade policy, Nintendo has filed a lawsuit against the administration of former U.S. President Donald Trump over tariffs the company says were imposed unlawfully. The Japanese gaming giant claims it was forced to pay millions of dollars in import duties under a policy that exceeded presidential authority, and it is now seeking refunds plus interest. The lawsuit, filed in 2026 at the United States Court of International Trade, represents one of the most significant corporate challenges to the trade measures implemented during the Trump presidency. The case highlights the complicated relationship between government trade policies and global technology companies that depend heavily on international supply chains. For Nintendo, the stakes are not only financial but also strategic. The company argues that the tariffs disrupted business operations, complicated hardware launches, and forced difficult pricing decisions for the American market. Background: Trump's tariff strategy. During his presidency, Donald Trump frequently relied on tariffs as a key tool in his economic and trade policy. His administration argued that decades of global trade agreements had disadvantaged American manufacturing and that new tariffs were necessary to level the playing field. Tariffs were imposed on a wide range of imported goods from several countries, including China, Vietnam, India, and Brazil. These tariffs targeted industries ranging from steel and aluminum to consumer electronics and technology products. The Trump administration justified many of these tariffs using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act (IEEPA), a law passed in 1977 that allows the president to regulate economic transactions during national emergencies. Officials argued that economic threats posed by foreign trade practices constituted such an emergency. However, critics argued that the law does not grant the president the authority to impose tariffs on imports. According to many legal scholars, tariff powers are constitutionally reserved for Congress. This disagreement eventually led to a series of lawsuits from companies affected by the tariffs. Why Nintendo was affected? Nintendo is one of the world's most recognizable gaming companies, responsible for iconic franchises such as Mario, The Legend of Zelda, and Pokémon. The company's hardware business relies heavily on global manufacturing networks. Many of Nintendo's gaming consoles and accessories are produced in Asia before being imported into the United States. Because of this supply chain structure, tariffs on imported electronics had a direct financial impact on the company. When the tariffs took effect, Nintendo of America, the company's U.S. subsidiary, was responsible for paying the duties when importing products into the country. According to the lawsuit, these payments quickly added up to significant amounts. The company argues that these costs placed an unfair financial burden on its operations in the United States. The role of the Supreme Court. The legal landscape surrounding the tariffs changed dramatically after a ruling by the Supreme Court of the United States in early 2026. In a landmark decision, the court ruled that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act does not authorize the president to impose tariffs. The ruling concluded that such powers belong primarily to Congress under the U.S. Constitution. This decision effectively invalidated the legal foundation used by the Trump administration to impose many of its tariffs. While the ruling clarified the limits of presidential authority, it did not automatically return the money companies had already paid. Businesses were left uncertain about whether they would be reimbursed for tariffs that had now been deemed unlawful. This uncertainty prompted companies like Nintendo to pursue legal action. Nintendo's legal claims. In its lawsuit, Nintendo argues that the U.S. government collected tariffs without legal authority and that the company suffered financial harm as a result. The complaint names several federal agencies involved in administering and collecting tariffs. These include the U.S. Department of the Treasury, the Department of Homeland Security, and U.S. Customs and Border Protection. According to the filing, these agencies enforced tariffs that exceeded the authority granted under federal law. Nintendo argues that the government must therefore return the money collected from importers. The company is asking the court for three main remedies: a full refund of all tariffs paid under the disputed policy, interest on the refunded money, reimbursement for legal expenses. Nintendo's legal team argues that failure to provide refunds would amount to the government retaining funds that were collected unlawfully. Impact on the gaming industry. The gaming industry is particularly vulnerable to changes in trade policy because of its reliance on international manufacturing. Unlike software companies, hardware manufacturers must ship physical products across borders. Gaming consoles require numerous components, including processors, memory chips, displays, and controllers, many of which are produced in different countries. Tariffs on these components or finished products can dramatically increase production costs. companies must then decide whether to absorb these costs internally or pass them on to consumers through higher prices. For a company like Nintendo, which competes in a highly price-sensitive market, even small cost increases can influence consumer demand. The Switch 2 launch complications. The tariffs arrived at a particularly challenging moment for Nintendo, as the company was preparing to release its next-generation console, the Nintendo Switch 2. The original Nintendo Switch had been a massive global success, selling millions of units and revitalizing the company's hardware business. Expectations were extremely high for its successor. However, the uncertainty created by the tariffs complicated the launch strategy. Nintendo reportedly delayed some U.S. pre-order plans while executives evaluated how the tariffs might affect pricing and supply. Ultimately, the company moved forward with the launch but adjusted pricing on certain accessories and products. These changes reflected the financial pressure created by the import duties. A wave of corporate challenges. Nintendo's lawsuit is part of a much larger wave of corporate litigation targeting the Trump-era tariffs. Hundreds of companies across multiple industries have filed legal challenges seeking refunds for tariffs they paid. These companies include major retailers, manufacturers, and logistics firms. Some estimates suggest that the total value of tariffs collected under the disputed policy could exceed hundreds of billions of dollars. If courts ultimately rule that the tariffs were unlawful and order refunds, the financial consequences for the U.S. government could be enormous. Such a decision would also set an important precedent regarding the limits of presidential authority in trade policy. Government response and challenges. Despite the Supreme Court ruling, the U.S. government has not immediately refunded the tariffs. One reason is the complexity of the customs system that processes import duties. Tariffs are tied to specific import transactions, and calculating refunds for thousands of companies could require reviewing millions of records. Government agencies have also suggested that their current systems are not equipped to process refunds on such a massive scale. This logistical challenge has created frustration among companies that believe they are entitled to reimbursement. For Nintendo, the lawsuit represents an effort to ensure that its claim for refunds is formally recognized and processed. The political debate over tariffs. The legal dispute reflects a broader debate over the role of tariffs in U.S. economic policy. Supporters of Trump's tariffs argue that they were necessary to protect American industries and reduce reliance on foreign manufacturing. They claim that tariffs can encourage companies to move production back to the United States. Critics, however, argue that tariffs function as hidden taxes on businesses and consumers. When companies pay higher import costs, they often raise prices to compensate. Economists have long debated the effectiveness of tariffs as a tool for strengthening domestic industries. Nintendo's lawsuit brings this debate into focus by illustrating how tariffs can affect global technology companies and consumer products. Possible outcomes of the case. Several possible outcomes could emerge from Nintendo's lawsuit. The court could rule fully in Nintendo's favor, ordering the government to refund all tariffs paid under the disputed policy. Such a decision could open the door for thousands of other companies to receive similar refunds. Alternatively, the court could rule that refunds should be limited to certain time periods or specific tariff categories. Another possibility is a lengthy appeals process that could send the case to higher courts. Because of the massive financial implications involved, legal experts expect the dispute to take considerable time to resolve. Global trade implications. The outcome of this case could have far-reaching consequences beyond the gaming industry. If the courts confirm strict limits on presidential tariff authority, future administrations may need explicit approval from Congress before imposing similar trade measures. This could significantly reshape how the United States approaches economic conflicts with other countries. For multinational companies, the ruling may also influence decisions about manufacturing locations and supply chain strategies. Businesses will likely pay close attention to the case when planning future investments and product launches. Conclusion. Nintendo's lawsuit against the Trump administration represents a significant moment in the ongoing debate over trade policy and executive power. By challenging tariffs it describes as unlawful, Nintendo is seeking to recover money that it believes was improperly collected. The case highlights the real-world consequences of government trade decisions for companies operating in global markets. At the same time, the lawsuit raises important constitutional questions about who has the authority to impose tariffs in the United States. As the case moves forward through the courts, its outcome could shape the future of U.S. trade policy, corporate litigation, and international business strategy. For Nintendo, the goal is straightforward: recover the money it paid and ensure that similar trade policies cannot disrupt its operations again. But for the broader business community, the case may ultimately determine how far presidential power can extend in shaping the global economy.